"I'm sorry, I can't afford this dinner," she whispered to the man sitting across from her, tears streaming down her cheeks as she wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Because nothing could be worse than crying over a declined card in the middle of a first date with someone she actually liked. But what he did next changed everything. What Haley Reyes didn't know was that the 36-year-old man watching her fall apart with the gentlest eyes she had ever seen was Luca Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast, and the restaurant where she sat drowning in shame. Every brick, every chair, every drop of wine belonged to him. The staff recognized their boss the moment he walked in, but with just one look, one subtle gesture, he silenced them all, signaling them to treat him like any ordinary customer and never interfere. He could have snapped his fingers and made her embarrassment disappear, could have revealed who he was and watched her look at him with fear like everyone else did. But he chose not to. Because for the first time in years, someone was looking at him like he was just a man, not a monster, and he wasn't ready to lose that. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. If this story reminded you that the right person won't run when they see the real you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Sometimes the most embarrassing, satisfying moments of our lives lead to the most beautiful ones. But to understand why Haley Reyes was sitting in that upscale restaurant with only $15 in her wallet, we need to rewind time by 12 hours. Back to when she woke up at 5 in the morning, in the rundown studio apartment in Brooklyn, where the monthly rent still swallowed nearly half of her income. The apartment had only one room, peeling walls, pipes that groaned every time someone in the building flushed the toilet, and a window that looked onto the brick wall of the building across the way instead of the sky. Haley lay on the old bed staring up at the ceiling, and the first thing she did every morning was check her phone. Not to see messages from friends, but to see how many new bills were waiting for her. That morning there were 3 messages. One from Mount Sinai Hospital reminding her that her mother's cancer treatment debt had reached $12,000 and needed to be paid. One from the landlord asking when she would pay this month's rent because it was already 5 days late. And one from Noah, her 19-year-old younger brother, saying he needed $200 to buy books for the new term at medical school. Haley closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and did what she always did whenever her family needed her. She opened Venmo and sent $200 to her brother without checking her account balance because she knew that if she saw the real number in there, she wouldn't dare send it. Her mother, Margaret Reyes, 58 years old, was fighting stage 3 lung cancer in the hospital. And every time Haley visited, her mother asked whether her daughter was eating properly, sleeping enough, going out with friends, as if she weren't the one lying in a hospital bed with tubes running through her body. Haley always lied to her mother, telling her everything was fine, that she had savings, that work was going great, because she didn't want her mother to worry when she should have been focusing on recovery. The truth was that Haley worked 2 jobs, during the day from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon at Sweet Rye's Bakery on the corner, and at night from 6 until 11 serving at a small bar to earn extra tips. She ate lunch from leftover bread at the bakery, ate dinner from whatever was cheapest she could find, and hadn't bought new clothes in almost 2 years. That afternoon, when Haley visited her mother at the hospital, her mother held her hand and asked in a weak voice whether she had a date that night, because a friend had messaged her saying Haley had someone interested in her on a dating app. Haley was about to refuse, about to say she was too tired, but her mother's eyes lit up with a rare flicker of hope, and she couldn't bring herself to extinguish it. Maria, her only close friend, had created a dating profile for her without asking, and had matched her with a man named Luke, a small business owner with 2 daughters, and they had been messaging for 2 weeks. She had to admit that his messages made her smile more than she had smiled in months. That evening, Haley stood in front of her nearly empty closet and pulled out the only dress that was still intact, a simple black dress she had bought at a thrift store 3 years earlier. She looked at herself in the mirror and told herself that as long as she ordered the cheapest thing and drank tap water, the $35 in her account would be enough to cover her share. She didn't know that her rent would be automatically withdrawn the next morning, and that the $200 she sent to Noah had left her account nearly empty. She also didn't know that the man she was about to meet wasn't Luke Morris, a small business owner in delivery and management, but Luca Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast of the United States. And she certainly didn't know that the evening she thought would be the greatest disaster of her life would be the very night that changed her fate completely. While Haley was struggling over every single coin in Brooklyn, on the other side of Manhattan, Luca Moretti was sitting in a hidden conference room beneath the basement of a building that looked like an ordinary office, but was in fact the command center of the largest underground empire on the eastern coast of the United States. 12 men sat around the table, all of them silent, all of them looking at him with a reverence Luca had grown so accustomed to that it no longer stirred any feeling in him. Marco Santini, his right-hand man, a 42-year-old who had followed him since Luca was a teenager, learning how to run the empire from his father, was reporting on territorial matters. Viktor Kozlov, the Russian Mafia boss, was encroaching on their territory in southern Manhattan and had sent a very clear message by killing 2 of Luca's men the previous week. Marco said that Kozlov was looking for a way to strike Luca through the people he cared about, and when Luca heard that, he merely nodded once and gave the order in a voice as cold as ice to find out who had sold information to Kozlov and bring them to him. No one in the room asked what he would do to the traitors because everyone already knew the answer. The meeting ended at 6 in the evening, and Luca drove back to the mansion on the Upper East Side, where he lived with his 2 daughters and Rosa, the nanny who had taken care of his family since he was a child. As he walked through the door, 2 small bodies rushed forward and wrapped themselves around his legs. Rosie and Bella, 2 6-year-old angels with black hair like their mother's and blue eyes like their father's, competing to tell him about their day at school. Luca sat down and pulled both girls into his arms, and in that moment the ruthless Mafia boss vanished, leaving only a father who loved his daughters more than his own life. Then Bella looked up at him with her clear, innocent eyes and asked in a naive voice, "Daddy, when will you find us a new mommy, because all my friends at school have one and we don't?" Luca felt as if someone had just driven a knife into his chest. 3 years earlier, Gianna, his wife, the woman he had loved since his teenage years, had been kidnapped and killed by the Kozlov gang as revenge against him. He had found her in an abandoned warehouse, too late, and that image had haunted him every night since. He blamed himself for failing to protect her, and he had sworn that he would never let anyone get close to him again because anyone who loved Luca Moretti would become a target. But that night, after putting the children to bed, Rosa pulled him aside and said, "Boss, it has been 3 years. You can't live like this forever. The children need a mother and you need someone by your side." He was about to argue, but Rosa handed him a phone, and he realized that Marco had set up a dating profile for him on an app, using a fake name, Luke Morris, with the occupation listed as a small business owner in delivery and management. He was angry and was about to delete it immediately, but then he saw a match notification with a woman named Haley Reyes, a simple profile, unedited photos, and a bio that said she wasn't looking for someone perfect, just someone sincere. He didn't know why he tapped on the message, didn't know why he started typing. But over the next 2 weeks, he found himself waiting for her messages every day like a child waiting for gifts. She was funny, she was intelligent, she told him about her job at the bakery and the strange customers she encountered, and for the first time in 3 years, Luca Moretti truly laughed. When she agreed to have dinner with him, he chose the restaurant La Dolce Vita not to show off, but because it was a place he completely controlled, the safest place he could take her without fearing that Kozlov or any enemy could reach her. He didn't know that she was counting every single coin to pay for the meal. He didn't know that she would cry from humiliation right in front of him. And he certainly didn't know that those tears would shatter every wall he had built around his heart over the past 3 years. La Dolce Vita sat in the heart of Manhattan, a historic building with a red brick facade and large glass windows that let candlelight spill onto the sidewalk, creating a warm golden glow Haley had only ever seen in movies. She stood outside the restaurant at 6:45, earlier than planned because she was too anxious to stay in her apartment another minute, and when she looked inside through the glass, she almost turned around and ran. White tablecloths draped over every table, polished silverware gleamed under soft lights, wine bottles that surely cost as much as her entire monthly salary lined the walls, and diners were dressed as if they had stepped straight out of a fashion magazine. Haley glanced down at her worn black dress and wondered what she was doing here. A bakery worker whose hands were always dusted with flour trying to blend into a world she did not belong to. But before she could decide to leave, a hand lightly touched her shoulder, and a warm, deep voice said, "Haley, right, I am Luke. It is really nice to meet you." She turned around and every thought of running vanished instantly. The man standing in front of her was nearly a head taller than she was, his dark hair neatly styled, deep blue eyes like the ocean looking at her with a gentleness she had not expected, and he wore a dark blue shirt that was simple but clearly pressed with care. He smiled at her, and there was something slightly shy about it, as if he was just as nervous as she was, and that alone made Haley breathe easier. They walked into the restaurant together, and immediately a middle-aged man in a black suit hurried over to greet them with a broad smile. But when he opened his mouth as if to say something like boss or sir, Luca flicked him a glance so quick Haley barely noticed, and the man instantly changed his tone and said, "Welcome to La Dolce Vita. My name is Tony, the restaurant manager. Please follow me." Haley did not notice the strange shift. She was too busy worrying about how expensive the menu might be and whether $35 would be enough to cover her share. They were led to a small table by the window, candlelight flickering between them, and when Haley opened the menu, her heart nearly stopped. The cheapest appetizer was $25. The least expensive main course was $40, and she quickly closed the menu and told Luke that she would just like a small plate of pasta and tap water, because she was not very hungry. Luca studied her for a moment, as if reading something on her face, but he did not comment. He simply nodded and ordered something similar for himself. Then they started talking, and all her worries about money, about prices, about her old dress slowly faded when Haley realized the man sitting across from her was truly listening to every word she said. She told him about her job at Sweet Rise Bakery, about how she could decorate a 3-tier wedding cake with her eyes closed, about the regular customer who came in every Monday morning to buy croissants and complain about her husband for 20 minutes straight, about the neighborhood boy who often stopped by asking for leftover pastries, and how Haley always pretended they were mistakes so he would not feel embarrassed. Luca sat there with his chin resting on his hand, his eyes never leaving her for a second, and every so often he laughed, a deep, warm sound that made Haley feel as if she had just said the smartest thing in the world, even when she was only talking about the time she dropped an entire tray of pastries on her own head. He asked follow-up questions, not the shallow, polite ones people usually asked, but questions that showed he genuinely cared, and he did not look at his phone even once. When it was his turn, he said he worked in small business, delivery, and management, and there was a slight hesitation in his voice, as if he was not used to talking about himself. But when he spoke about Rosie and Bella, his 6-year-old twin daughters, his eyes lit up in a completely different way, and he told her how the week before he had sent them to school with lunch boxes but had forgotten to put food inside, sending 2 empty containers, as if he were conducting some cruel psychological experiment. Haley burst out laughing so hard she nearly spat out her water, and Luca watched her with a strange look in his eyes, as if he were seeing something precious he was afraid of losing. He told her that his wife had passed away 3 years earlier, and that he was raising the girls alone, and when he said it, his voice softened in a way that made Haley want to reach out and take his hand. She told him about her mother undergoing treatment, about her brother studying medicine so he could one day help cure her, and she realized that they were both carrying heavy burdens, just in very different ways. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other for years, and Haley thought that maybe Maria had been right. Maybe she really needed this. Maybe she deserved one normal evening with a kind man. She did not know that this kind man had ordered someone killed earlier that morning. She did not know that the restaurant belonged to him, and that every staff member was trying not to look in their direction for too long. And she certainly did not know that in just a few minutes, when the bill was placed on the table, her world was about to collapse right in front of him. Luca watched Haley cry, and felt as if someone were crushing his heart with bare hands. Over the past 3 years, he had seen enemies drop to their knees and beg, had watched the toughest men tremble before him, had witnessed fear in the eyes of hundreds of people. Yet nothing had ever hurt him like this, like watching the girl sitting across from him spill tears out of shame over a few dozen dollars that meant nothing to him but meant the entire world to her. He could see Tony standing nearby, waiting, and Luca knew that with a single nod, with a single word, not only this dinner but a year's worth of meals would be free. The staff would bow and apologize for upsetting the boss's guest, and everything would be resolved in an instant. But if he did that, she would know. She would know he wasn't Luke Morris, a small businessman in delivery and management. She would know he was Luca Moretti, the man this entire city feared, and the way she looked at him would change forever, from clear, trusting eyes to the same fear he saw in everyone else. And Luca realized he couldn't bear that. So he did something the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast of the United States had never done in his life. He pretended to be an ordinary man. He reached across the table, gently placed his hand over her trembling one, and said in the softest voice he could manage, "Haley, look at me. This really isn't a big deal. It truly isn't." She looked up at him, eyes red, cheeks soaked with tears, and Luca felt as if a knife had been driven into his chest all over again. He went on, saying, "Let me tell you something. When I was just starting out, there was a time I took a business partner out to dinner. to discuss the most important deal of my career. And when the bill came, my card was declined too, right there in front of the person I was trying to impress. Haley looked at him, her eyes still wet but now tinged with curiosity. Luca continued, saying I had to call my mother, right there at the table, and borrow money to pay the bill. 36 years old and calling my mom to ask for money in front of a business partner. I wanted the ground to swallow me even more than you do right now. It was a complete lie. Luca had never lacked money in his life, had never known what it felt like to have a card declined. But he made up that story because he didn't want her to feel alone in her embarrassment. And when he saw the corner of her mouth lift just slightly, when he saw her shoulders relax even a little, he knew he had done the right thing. He added that he should pay this time, not because he was rich or anything. He was just trying to get by too, but because he understood this feeling, and he didn't want her to go through it alone. Haley shook her head, saying no. They had agreed to split the bill. She couldn't let him pay for everything. She would transfer the money back to him when she got paid. Luca almost laughed at her stubbornness, at the pride that refused to bend even while she was crying, and he realized this was what made her different from everyone he had ever known. He said, "All right then, you can pay next time. We'll call this a loan, no interest." She looked at him for a long moment, as if searching his eyes for any hint of pretense or hidden motive, but she found nothing except sincerity, because in that moment Luca was more sincere than he had ever been in his life. He took out his card and handed it to the server standing nearby, and he noticed the server's hand tremble slightly as he took it because the man knew he was holding the boss's card. Luca shot him a look of warning, and the server understood, moving quickly without saying a word. Haley didn't notice the silent exchange. She was too busy wiping away her tears and trying to steady herself. She told him she was sorry for ruining the evening, that he was probably thinking she was a complete mess, that she wouldn't blame him if he didn't want to see her again. And Luca, a man who had killed without hesitation, who had watched enemies die in front of him without flinching, felt his heart melt at those words. He squeezed her hand tighter and said, "Are you kidding? This is the most interesting first date I've ever had, and I'm not going anywhere, unless you tell me to leave." They left the restaurant after Luca paid, and instead of parting ways right away as Haley had expected, he asked if she wanted to take a short walk because the night was still early, and he did not feel like going home yet. Haley nodded even though she was not sure why. Maybe because she did not want the evening to end even after it had turned into a disaster. Or maybe because the way he looked at her had not changed at all, even though she had just cried uncontrollably in front of him. They walked to a stone bench right outside the restaurant, under the soft yellow glow of the streetlights, and sat beside each other in silence for a moment before Haley began to speak. She told him she needed him to understand that she was not someone who liked to borrow or ask for help, that she worked relentlessly, 2 jobs every day. During the day at the bakery and at night at a bar, that she tried her hardest, but sometimes life was simply too expensive, and everything piled up at once. She told him about her mother undergoing cancer treatment with $12,000 in unpaid medical bills, about her brother studying medicine, whom she fully supported because their father had died when she was young and her mother was now ill, about the rundown apartment whose rent swallowed nearly half her monthly income, about how she had not bought new clothes in 2 years, and the dress she was wearing was secondhand from a thrift store 3 years ago. Luca sat quietly and listened, not interrupting, not showing pity, simply listening as if every word she said mattered. Then Haley shared something she had never told anyone except Maria, about Derek Mason, her former boyfriend. She said that 2 years earlier she had loved a man she believed she would spend her life with, but he had abused her, starting with words, then slaps, then beatings she had hidden beneath layers of makeup. And when she had finally found the courage to leave, he had taken all her savings, $3,000 she had saved over 4 years, and disappeared as if he had never existed. Haley's voice trembled as she told him these things, and she did not know why she was telling someone she had just met. But there was something about Luke that made her want to be honest, that made her want him to know who she truly was before he decided whether he wanted to see her again. Luca listened, his jaw tightening so hard that Haley could see the muscles twitch beneath his skin, but she did not know that in his mind he was memorizing the name Derek Mason and swearing he would find him no matter the cost. He said nothing about the rage boiling inside him. Instead, he began to talk about Gianna. He said his wife had died 3 years earlier, and for the first time that night his voice shook. He told her they had loved each other since high school, that she was the only person who had ever seen his true self rather than the mask he showed the world, and when she was gone he had believed he would never be able to open his heart again. He said she had died in an accident, and that was the only lie in everything he shared that night, because he could not say she had been killed because of him, that he was the reason she was no longer alive, that every night he still saw her face in his nightmares. He told her that Rosie and Bella asked him every week when he would find them a new mother. And every time he heard that question, his heart felt torn in two because he did not know how to answer. They sat in silence for a while after he finished, two strangers sharing their deepest wounds beneath the streetlights, and something in the air shifted, as if they had just signed an invisible contract that said, "We are both broken, but maybe we can be broken together." Haley turned to him and asked softly whether he judged her. For being poor, for crying on a first date, for having a past with an abuser. Luca turned to look at her, his eyes in the darkness deep like the ocean, and he said, "Judge you. You worked 2 jobs to take care of your mother and brother. You were treated horribly by a bastard. And still you stood up and kept living? You are sitting here being honest with me about everything even though we just met." He paused for a second, and then added, "Do you know what I see in you tonight? I see the realest, bravest, strongest woman I have ever met in my life. And if anyone deserves judgment here, it is the person who hurt you, not you." Haley felt tears rise again, but this time not from shame, but because it had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like that, so long since anyone had looked at her and seen something valuable instead of a poor girl to be pitied. She did not know that the man saying those words to her was a mafia boss who could buy the entire building she lived in without a second thought. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time, she felt seen. The next 2 months passed like a dream Haley did not dare believe was real. After that disastrous evening, she thought Luke would disappear like every other good thing in her life. But not only did he not disappear, he texted her the very next morning asking when they could see each other again. They began dating regularly, and what surprised Haley was that Luke never chose expensive places, as if he understood without her ever having to say a word. They walked through Central Park on weekend afternoons, sitting on the grass watching children play and other couples pass by. They bought pizza from sidewalk carts and ate it on stone benches, Haley laughing when Luke got tomato sauce on his nose and he pretended not to notice just so she would keep laughing. They drank coffee from small neighborhood shops instead of Starbucks, watched free outdoor movies on Friday nights, and strolled along the Hudson River as the sun set. Every date was simple, inexpensive, and perfect. And Haley did not know that the man eating street pizza with her owned dozens of 5-star restaurants in Manhattan. She also did not know that wherever they went, there were always at least 3 of Luca's men following at a safe distance, protecting her without her ever realizing it. Marco had protested his boss moving around without visible bodyguards, but Luca said he did not want her to know. He wanted her to feel like she was dating an ordinary man, and Marco reluctantly accepted the solution of distant surveillance. But what Luca did next was what truly crossed the line he had set for himself. One night after walking Haley home, he summoned Marco and ordered him to investigate her mother's medical debt. 2 days later, Marco reported that Margaret Reyes owed Mount Sinai Hospital $12,000 for cancer treatment, and the family had no ability to pay. Luca said nothing, only nodded. And the next morning, a payment from an organization called the New York Cancer Patient Support Fund was transferred to the hospital to settle the entire debt. That organization did not exist until Luca ordered it created the night before. A week later, Haley called him at 11 at night, her voice so choked he almost thought something terrible had happened. But she was crying from happiness. She said the hospital had just called to tell her that all of her mother's medical bills had been covered by a support program, that she did not know what the program was, or why they had chosen her mother. But it felt like a miracle had just occurred. Luca listened to her cry through the phone, and for the first time in his life, he felt that the money he made truly meant something, not because of the power or fear it brought, but because it could make this woman cry with joy. He did not tell her the truth. He only said it was something she and her mother deserved, and that he was happy for her. Another evening, as they were walking home after a date in Central Park, a group of 3 men stepped out of a dark alley and blocked their path. One of them said in a rough voice, "Wallets and phones. Hurry up, nobody gets hurt." Haley stepped back behind Luke in fear, but she realized he was not trembling, not afraid. His shoulders were straighter, and something about his posture shifted completely, as if another person had awakened inside him. Luke stepped forward, and under the dim streetlight he simply looked at them, saying nothing, only staring with eyes as cold as ice that Haley had never seen before. The leader looked at Luke for 1 second, then 2, and suddenly his face went pale as if he had seen a ghost. He stammered, sorry, I did not know," then turned to his companions and shouted, "Let us go, now!" And all 3 ran into the darkness as if demons were chasing them. Haley stood there with her heart still pounding, staring at Luke in utter shock and asking what just happened. Why did they run? Did you know them? Luke turned back to her, and for a split second, Haley thought she saw something dark in his eyes. But it vanished so quickly she thought she had imagined it. He smiled lightly and said, "Maybe I just have a scary face." Then he took her hand and said, "Come on, I will walk you home." Haley let him lead her away. But deep inside, she felt something was strange, as if she were missing an important piece of a puzzle. She pushed the feeling aside because she trusted Luke, because he had proven himself kind for 2 months straight, because there was no reason to doubt the man who ate street pizza with her and made her laugh every day. After 2 months of dating, Luca finally found the courage to invite Haley to his home to meet Rosie and Bella. He had delayed this for so long because he was afraid that if his daughters grew to love her and things did not work out, they would lose yet another person. But both Marco and Rosa told him he could not hide her forever, and that the children had the right to know who the woman was who had made their father smile again. When Luca told Haley that he wanted her to meet his daughters, she fell silent for a long moment before asking in a worried voice, "What if they do not like me?" Luca laughed and said that was impossible, but inside he was just as nervous. That day, Haley spent the entire morning going from toy store to toy store, looking for gifts for the girls. And in the end, she chose 2 small, beautiful dolls that cost $25, nearly all the money she could afford to spend on herself that week. But she did not care because she wanted to make a good impression on the daughters of the man she was falling in love with. She did not know that the address he gave her was a mansion on the Upper East Side. And when the taxi stopped at the gate, Haley thought she had come to the wrong place. The house in front of her was at least 20 times larger than her studio apartment, with glossy black iron gates, a vast garden, and a towering oak door so tall she had to tilt her head back to look at it. She stood there for a moment, doubting whether Luke really lived there. But then the door opened, and he appeared with that familiar smile, waving her inside. Haley stepped in and tried not to let her jaw drop at the interior. Expensive-looking paintings on the walls, a massive crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, marble floors polished so brightly she could see her reflection. She whispered to Luke, asking whether his delivery and management job really paid that well. And Luca gave an awkward laugh and said he was lucky enough to inherit the house from his family. That was the only reason he could live there. Before Haley could ask anything else, 2 small figures appeared from behind the staircase. Rosie and Bella standing there in pretty floral dresses, their hair neatly braided into 2 pigtails, staring at Haley with wide eyes full of curiosity and shyness. Luca knelt down and told his daughters, "This is Miss Haley I told you about. Say hello." Rosie shyly said hello while Bella hid behind her sister, peeking out with one eye as if trying to decide whether this person could be trusted. Haley knelt down to their eye level, took out the dolls, and said she had heard from their dad that they liked dolls. She did not know which colors they liked, so she chose 1 pink and 1 purple. Did they like them? Bella was the first to step out from behind her sister, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the purple doll, and she timidly took it and whispered, "Thank you." Rosie followed, and within 10 minutes both girls were sitting on the floor playing dolls with Haley as if they had known each other forever. Luca stood by the kitchen doorway watching the scene and felt his heart beating wildly. That afternoon, Haley suggested baking together with the girls, and the modern kitchen that had barely ever been used was filled with laughter for the first time. Haley showed Rosie and Bella how to mix the flour, how to crack the eggs, how to add vanilla to the batter, and soon all 3 of them had flour smeared across their faces and did not care at all. Rosa, the 65-year-old nanny who had taken care of the Moretti family since Luca was a child, stood outside the kitchen watching, with tears streaming down her face. Luca went over and asked Rosa why she was crying, and she said it has been 3 years since this kitchen heard the children laugh like this. 3 years since this house felt the warmth of a woman again, and she knew that Madame Gianna was smiling from heaven. Luca looked into the kitchen, watched Haley laughing as Bella smeared batter on Rosie's nose, and he realized something that filled him with both fear and happiness. He was in love with her, truly in love, not just fond or caring, but in love in a way he thought he would never be capable of again after Gianna. After the cake was baked and they all sat down to eat together, Bella suddenly looked up at Haley and asked in an innocent voice, "Miss Haley, can you be my mommy? Because I do not have a mommy and you make really good cake." The entire room fell silent. Luca nearly choked on his bite of cake, and Haley looked at the little girl with tear-filled eyes, unsure how to answer. Before she could say anything, Rosie tugged on Haley's sleeve and said, "Very seriously, Miss Haley, our birthday is next week. Can you promise to make our birthday cake? Because Daddy cannot bake, and Aunt Rosa's cake is not very good." Rosa pretended to be offended and said, "This child dares to insult my cake," and the whole room burst into laughter, breaking the tension. Haley knelt down, took both girls' hands, and said she promised she would make the most beautiful and delicious birthday cake for them, and it was a promise she would keep. Rosie looked at her with clear eyes and said, "Our mommy also promised to make us a cake." But mommy could not keep her promise because she went very far away. Haley felt her heart shatter into a million pieces at those words, and she pulled both girls into a tight embrace, whispering that she would keep her promise. She swore it. While Haley was enjoying the happiest days of her life, in another dark corner of the city, Derek Mason was kneeling before Victor Kozlov inside an abandoned warehouse in the South Bronx. He owed Kozlov $50,000 in gambling debt, a sum he had no way of repaying, and Kozlov was not the kind of man who accepted apologies in place of cash. Kozlov sat in his chair like a king on a throne, looking down at Derek with contempt and telling him he had two choices: either pay the money within 1 week or do a job for him. Derek did not have the money, so he chose the second option. Kozlov tossed a photograph onto the floor in front of him, and when Derek saw the face in the picture, his body went rigid. It was Haley, his former girlfriend, the woman he had beaten and stripped of her savings before disappearing. Kozlov said he knew Derek had a history with this woman, and he also knew she was now dating Luca Moretti, the enemy he wanted destroyed more than anyone else in the world. Derek's task was simple: get close to her, learn everything about Moretti, and report back to Kozlov. If he did well, his debt would be erased. If he failed, Kozlov would teach him what hell on earth truly felt like. 1 week later, Derek appeared at the Sweet Rise Bakery one morning while Haley was standing behind the counter. When she saw him walk in, the blood in her veins seemed to freeze. 2 years had passed. He looked thinner, more worn down, but those eyes were still the same eyes she had seen before every beating. Derek stepped up to the counter wearing a carefully rehearsed expression of remorse and said, "Haley, I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I have changed. I want to apologize for everything I did to you." Haley stared at him without blinking and said in a voice as cold as ice, "You hit me. You took all my money. You turned 2 years of my life into hell. And now you come here saying you have changed? How stupid do you think I am?" Derek tried to maintain his pained expression and said he understood she was angry and had every right to be, but he truly wanted to start over. He just wanted to talk. Haley shook her head and said there was nothing to talk about and he needed to leave before she called the police. Derek's face shifted in an instant from fake remorse to real rage, and he reached across the counter and grabbed Haley's wrist, squeezing hard enough to make her wince in pain. He growled that she thought she was someone special now, that she was just a broke nobody and she should not act so high and mighty with him. Maria ran out from the kitchen yelling at him to let her go, and when customers in the shop began to stare, Derek released Haley's wrist but glared at her with pure menace and said she would regret this. He swore it. Then he turned and walked out of the bakery, leaving Haley standing there with her wrist reddened and her heart pounding with fear. She did not know that the entire incident had been recorded by one of Luca's men and sent to Marco immediately. 20 minutes later, Marco walked into Luca's office with a grave expression and reported that a man named Derek Mason had approached Miss Haley at the bakery, that he was her former boyfriend, and that he had ties to Kozlov. Luca had been signing documents, but when he heard the name Derek Mason, the pen in his hand stopped, and when Kozlov's name followed, his eyes darkened like the sky before a storm. He asked in a voice cold as ice whether Derek had touched her. Marco replied that he had grabbed her wrist and threatened her. Luca stood up, and Marco saw something in his boss's eyes he had not seen in 3 years. A fury capable of burning this entire city to the ground. Luca gave his orders without a trace of emotion. Find out everything about Derek Mason, where he lives, what he does, how much he owes Kozlov, and increase protection on Haley to 24/7. Do not let her out of sight for even a second. Marco nodded and asked, "What about Derek?" Luca looked out the window and said, "Not yet." He wanted to know what game Kozlov was playing first, but if Derek touched her one more time, bring him to me. In the days following the encounter with Derek, Haley began to feel that something was not right. She noticed strangers appearing in the places she passed through, a man in a black jacket standing across from the bakery for an entire morning, a black car parked near the bus stop she used every day, a shadow following her on her way home and vanishing the moment she turned to look. She told herself she was being paranoid, that Derek was only trying to scare her and would not dare do anything real. But the survival instinct she had developed after 2 years of living with an abuser told her that something was closing in. One night after her shift at the bar, Haley returned to her apartment close to midnight. and the moment she put her key into the lock, she realized the door was unlocked. Her heart began to race as she pushed the door open and stepped inside, and what she saw froze her in place. Her small apartment had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, clothes thrown across the floor, the mattress flipped on its side, and on the dining table lay a photograph of her and Luke walking in Central Park with words written in red ink that said, "We are watching." Haley could not breathe. She backed out of the apartment and dialed Luke's number with trembling hands. He answered after the first ring, and the moment he heard her panicked voice, he said, "Where are you? I am coming right now. Do not go anywhere." 15 minutes later, a black car screeched to a stop in front of her building and Luke stepped out. But something about him was different tonight. The way he moved quickly and decisively. The way his eyes swept the street as if searching for danger. The way he pulled her into his arms and then immediately pushed her behind him, as though shielding her from something invisible. He entered the apartment and checked every corner, picked up the photograph and stared at it with his jaw clenched, and Haley saw his eyes darken in a way that sent a chill through her. He turned back to her and spoke in a voice that was no longer the Luke she knew. It was the voice of a man used to giving orders and not accepting refusal, telling her to pack her things right now and come stay at his place. No discussion, no argument. Haley stared at him in confusion and asked Luke what was happening, why he had arrived so fast, why he knew exactly what to do, why he looked at her apartment as if he were searching for something specific. He did not answer her questions, only said he would explain later, that right now she needed to trust him, that someone wanted to hurt her and he could not let her stay here alone. Haley wanted to ask more, wanted to know why a small businessman could handle this situation so calmly, why he did not suggest calling the police, why everything about him tonight made her feel as though she were standing in front of a complete stranger. But she was too afraid to stay alone, so she did as he told her, stuffed a few clothes into a bag and followed him down the stairs. When they stepped outside the building, Haley saw another black car parked at the end of the street, headlights off but with a silhouette visible inside. Luke saw the car too and tightened his grip on her hand, pulling her toward his own car with quicker steps. They had barely gotten inside and shut the doors when the other car turned on its lights and started rolling toward them. Luke hit the gas, and the car shot forward at a speed that pressed Haley back into her seat. He swerved through narrow streets, turning left and right in rapid succession as if he knew every alley of this city by heart, and Haley watched him with growing terror, because this was not how an ordinary businessman drove. This was how someone used to being chased drove. She screamed, asking Luke who he was, why he was driving like they were fleeing, what the hell was going on. Luke did not take his eyes off the road, his jaw tight, and he said in a low, heavy voice that he would explain everything once they got home. But right now she needed to stay quiet and let him focus. Haley glanced into the rearview mirror and saw the black car still following them, and she realized that her life had changed forever from this moment on. They drove for nearly 30 minutes, weaving through streets until Luke was certain they had shaken the car that had been following them, and then he headed toward the Upper East Side. When the car stopped in front of the mansion gate, Haley recognized the house she had visited the week before to meet Rosie and Bella. But this time, everything looked completely different. The iron gates opened, and she saw at least 6 men in black suits standing along the driveway, all of them with suspicious bulges at their waists that she was smart enough to know were guns. When Luke stepped out of the car, every one of those men bowed their heads at the same time and said 2 words that made Haley's blood run cold. They said, "Boss." She stood beside the car, unable to move her legs, watching the man she thought she had understood for 2 months walk among armed guards, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Luke turned back when he realized she was not following, and when their eyes met, she saw pain on his face she had never seen before, as if he knew everything was about to change and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He walked over to her and said in a low, heavy voice to come inside and that he would explain everything. Haley followed him into the mansion on legs that felt like they were floating, and when they reached his private study, a room with a massive oak desk and expensive paintings on the walls, he closed the door and turned to face her. He took a deep breath and said that his name was not Luke Morris, that his name was Luca Moretti, and that he was the head of the Moretti family. Haley shook her head as if refusing to believe what she was hearing and asked what the Moretti family was. Luca looked at her with painful honesty and said plainly that he was what people called a Mafia boss, that he controlled much of the underground operations on the east coast of the United States, from gambling to money laundering to things he did not want to describe to her. Haley felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs and she had to grip the arm of a chair to keep from collapsing. She asked in a trembling voice about the restaurant on their first night, the place where her card had been declined, And Luca nodded and said it was his restaurant. Every brick, every chair, every drop of wine belonged to him. The staff recognized him the moment he walked in, but he signaled them to stay silent because he did not want her to know. Haley remembered that night. Remembered how Tony had almost said something before Luke glanced at him. Remembered how the server's hand had trembled when he took the card. Remembered how the thugs had fled just from seeing Luke's face. And all the pieces suddenly snapped into place in a way that made her want to scream. She said bitterly that he had lied to her, that for 2 months everything had been a lie. The story about his card being declined, about his delivery and management job, about inheriting the house from his family, all of it was a lie. Luca stepped closer and said that yes, he had lied about his identity, about his work, about how he made his money, but his feelings for her were not a lie. The way he felt when he was with her, the way he smiled when he got her messages, the way his heart raced when he watched her play with his daughters, that was real. He swore it was real. Haley stepped back and shouted, "What do you swear? You are Mafia. You kill people. You do things I cannot even imagine, and you expect me to believe your feelings are real." Luca stood there taking every word like a knife to the chest, not trying to justify himself, not trying to defend himself, just standing there and enduring it because he knew she had every right to be angry. Then he said in a low, strained voice that there was something she needed to know, that his wife Gianna had not died in an accident, like he had told her. She had been murdered because she was his wife, because he was Luca Moretti, and his enemies wanted to destroy him by taking away the thing he loved most. Haley stared at him in horror as he continued, saying that Viktor Kozlov, the Russian mafia boss, had ordered his wife kidnapped and killed 3 years earlier, and now Kozlov knew about her. He knew Luca cared about her, and that was why her apartment had been broken into, why she had been followed, because Kozlov wanted to repeat what he had done to Gianna. Haley felt her legs give out, and she dropped onto the sofa, her head spinning with too much information she could not process. She whispered, asking why he had not told her from the beginning, why he had let her fall in love with a person who was not real. Luca knelt in front of her, his eyes red, and said that for the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at him as if he were just a normal man, not a monster, not a killer, just a man trying to be a good father and trying to find happiness again, and he could not bear to lose that look. He had been selfish. He knew it. But he could not stand the thought of her looking at him the way everyone else did. Haley looked at him kneeling before her, the most powerful man on the East Coast on his knees, speaking to her in pain, and she did not know what she should do, did not know what she should feel, did not know what she could believe anymore. Before Haley could say anything, the sound of gunfire erupted outside the mansion, shattering the tense air between them. Luca sprang to his feet like a panther, his eyes changing completely in an instant, from the pained gaze of a man begging for forgiveness to the icy stare of a ruthless killer. He pulled a handgun from the desk drawer, grabbed Haley's hand, and hauled her to her feet, saying in a voice stripped of all emotion that Kozlov was attacking and she had to get to the safe room immediately. Haley barely had time to react as he dragged her down the hallway amid continuous gunshots outside and the shouts of men fighting. They ran upstairs and Haley saw Rosa clutching Rosie and Bella tightly, all 3 of them crying. And when the girls saw their father, they rushed to him, wrapping themselves around his legs and sobbing that they were scared and asking what was happening. Luca knelt down and held his daughters for a brief second, then spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage, telling them he needed them to listen to him, that they were to go into the safe room with Miss Haley and Rosa and not come out until he came to get them. Did they understand? Rosie nodded through tears and asked in a trembling voice whether he would come back for them and made him promise. Luca kissed both girls on the forehead and said he promised, that he always came back to them. Then he stood and looked at Haley, his eyes filled with 1,000 unspoken words and no time, and he said only one thing, that he knew she was angry and had every right to be, but he was begging her to protect his daughters, because they were everything he had. Haley looked at him, at the 2 crying children clinging to her legs, at Rosa trembling with fear, and even though she was angry enough to scream at him, even though she was so overwhelmed she barely knew who she was anymore, she nodded. She nodded because Rosie and Bella were innocent, because they were just 2 6-year-old girls who had already lost their mother and should not lose anyone else. Because no matter who Luca was, she loved these children. Luca looked at her one last time and turned and ran, and that was when Haley saw a completely different Luca, a Luca with a gun, who moved like a hunting beast, a Luca she had never known existed. Rosa led them into a room hidden behind a wall in the master bedroom, a reinforced concrete space with a thick steel door, stocked with water, food, and a monitor showing feeds from security cameras throughout the mansion. Haley sank down onto the floor and the girls immediately climbed into her lap, clinging to her as if she were their only lifeline in the storm. Rosie cried and said she was scared and did not want to lose her daddy the way she had lost her mommy. And Bella said nothing, only sobbed softly while clutching Haley's shirt. Haley held both girls close and whispered that everything would be all right, that she was here, that she would not let anyone hurt them, that their daddy would come back because he had promised. She said those words even though she did not know if they were true, even though she was just as terrified as the children, even though she wanted to cry and scream from everything happening around her. But she was the adult here. She had to be strong for these girls. And she did it. She sang lullabies her mother used to sing to her. She told light-hearted stories to calm them. She held them as if her arms were the safest place in the world. On the security screen, she saw what was happening outside, and her blood ran cold. Dozens of men dressed in black were flooding the mansion, gunfire echoing as Luca's men fought to hold every inch. She saw Marco get shot in the shoulder and fall, only to force himself back up and keep firing. And she saw Luca in the middle of the battle, moving like a deadly shadow. Every shot he fired, finding its mark. Every step he took, bringing death with it. She had never seen anyone kill before. And now she was watching the man she loved take down enemy after enemy with a cold precision that made her shiver. The battle lasted nearly 30 minutes, though to Haley it felt like a lifetime. Then she saw Luca facing a gray-haired man she guessed was Kozlov, the two of them standing in the ruined courtyard surrounded by bodies and the stench of gunpowder. Kozlov said something the camera did not capture, and she saw him smile, a smile full of contempt. Then Luca said something back, and before Kozlov could react, Luca fired, one shot straight to the head, and Kozlov fell like an empty sack. A few yards away, Marco and his men intercepted Derek Mason as he tried to sneak away through the shadows of the courtyard, ensuring that the man who had once tormented Haley would finally face the consequences of his betrayal and never step foot near her again. Haley closed her eyes and felt Rosie and Bella cling to her even tighter, and she realized she was crying, not knowing whether it was from fear, from relief, or from the fact that she had just watched the man she loved kill another human being without hesitation. 10 minutes later, the steel door opened and Luca stood there, his white shirt soaked in blood, some of it his and some of it not, his face cut and bruised, but alive. Rosie and Bella burst from Haley's arms and ran to him, sobbing that he was okay, that he came back, that he kept his promise. Luca held his daughters tightly, and in that moment the cold-blooded killer vanished, leaving only a father who loved his girls more than his own life. He looked up at Haley standing in the corner of the safe room, her eyes red, her body trembling, and he had no idea what she was thinking, no idea whether she could still bear to look at him after everything she had just witnessed. Rosa led Rosie and Bella out of the safe room to take them to their bedroom and help them calm down after the nightmare they had just endured, leaving Luca and Haley standing face to face in the cold concrete room. Luca looked like a man who had walked out of hell, his white shirt now a dark crimson, dried blood streaked across his face and hands, a deep cut on his forehead still seeping, and his eyes fixed on her with the exhaustion of someone who had fought too many battles in his life. They stood there in silence for a long time, neither knowing what to say, neither knowing where to begin after everything that had just happened. Finally, Luca spoke first, his voice hoarse with fatigue as he said that she could leave if she wanted, that he would have people protect her and her family for the rest of their lives, that she would never have to worry about money or safety again, he promised, but she did not have to stay because of him. He understood if she could not accept who he was. He understood if she never wanted to look at him again after what she had just witnessed. Haley looked at him standing there, the man who had just killed dozens of people to protect her and his daughters, the man who had lied to her for 2 months, but was also the man who had made her laugh more than anyone ever had, the man she had fallen in love with, even though she did not want to admit it right now. She stepped closer, and before Luca could react, she slapped him hard. So hard his head snapped to the side, and the sound echoed through the quiet room. He did not dodge, did not block. He just stood there and took it as if he knew he deserved it. Haley spoke in a voice shaking with anger and tears, saying that was for lying to her, for letting her fall in love with someone who was not real, for dragging her into this insane world without giving her a choice. Luca nodded, accepting every accusation, still saying nothing to defend himself. Then Haley did something neither of them expected. She threw herself into his arms, holding him tightly as if afraid he would disappear, her head pressed against his blood-soaked chest as she cried, crying from fear, from relief, from anger, from love. crying from every emotion she could not name, pouring out of her all at once. Luca stood frozen for a second before wrapping his arms around her, holding her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched, and he whispered into her hair that he was sorry. Sorry for everything. Haley spoke into his chest, her voice muffled by tears and fabric, saying she needed time. She did not know if she could accept his world. She did not know if she could look at him the same way again after what she had just seen. But she knew one thing. She could not pretend the past 2 months had not happened. She could not pretend she did not love him, because no matter who he was, no matter what he had done, she still loved him, and that terrified her more than anything she had witnessed that night. Luca held her tighter and said he would give her all the time she needed. He would not force her into anything. He only asked one thing, that she stay here with him, because he could not protect her if she was out there alone, and he could not lose anyone else. He could not survive it if something happened to her. Haley did not answer with words. She only nodded against his chest, and they stood there holding each other in the safe room. 2 broken people trying to cling to one another in the storm. 1 month passed since that terrifying night. A month in which Haley lived in Luca's mansion but in a separate bedroom. A month spent trying to piece together the fragments in her mind and understand who the man she loved truly was. Luca kept his promise. He did not pressure her into anything, did not come to her room unless she invited him, did not demand answers to questions she was not ready to face. He simply stayed quietly nearby and waited. But living under the same roof meant Haley witnessed his real life. Not the life of Luke Morris, the small businessman, but the life of Luca Moretti, the Mafia boss. She saw him meeting with dangerous men in his study, saw him make decisions she did not understand and did not want to understand, saw him speak on the phone in that cold, sharp voice she had heard the night her apartment was broken into. Yet she saw other things too. She saw him sitting on the living room floor playing with dolls with Rosie and Bella, using ridiculous princess voices that made the girls laugh until they could barely breathe. She saw him read them bedtime stories every night, attempting different character voices, even though he was terrible at it. She saw him kiss their foreheads every morning before leaving and every night when he returned, no matter how late it was. And she saw him stand outside her bedroom door every night, never knocking, just standing there for a moment before walking away, as if he wanted to enter but did not dare. One afternoon while Luca was out, Rosa sat beside Haley in the garden and began to talk about Gianna. She said Gianna had been the gentlest woman she had ever known, that she was the only light in Luca's dark life, that when she died, Luca nearly lost his mind. He did not eat or sleep for a month. He wanted to follow her into death, and only Rosie and Bella kept him tethered to this world. Rosa said that for 3 years Luca lived like an empty shell, doing everything for his daughters while he himself had died long ago, until Haley appeared. She said that for the first time in 3 years she saw Luca truly smile. For the first time in 3 years she saw light return to his eyes, and that was because of Haley. 1 week later, Marco came to speak with Haley while she was sitting in the kitchen. His shoulder was still bandaged from the wound he took during the battle, and he told her in a low, steady voice that he had followed the boss since he was 18, that he had seen him become the most powerful man on the East Coast, that he had seen him lose his wife and nearly lose his sanity, that he had seen him build walls around his heart so high no one could climb them. Marco looked at her and continued, saying that she had changed him, that he did not know how she did it. But Luca was different since meeting her, less ruthless, smiling more, living more, and he had never thought he would see that again. That night, Haley could not sleep. She lay awake thinking about everything Rosa and Marco had said, thinking about Luca standing outside her door every night, thinking about the way he looked at her whenever they crossed paths in the hallway, eyes filled with so much love and so much fear. Then she thought about the cancer support program that had paid her mother's medical bills. And suddenly she understood. She got out of bed, walked down the hallway to Luca's room, and without knocking, she opened the door and stepped inside. Luca was sitting on the bed with his back against the headboard, eyes open and staring at the ceiling, clearly unable to sleep as well. When he saw her, he sat up, his eyes filled with surprise, and a flicker of hope he tried to hide. Haley did not speak. She walked to the bed, climbed onto it, lay down beside him, and closed her eyes. Luca lay down next to her, neither of them touching, just lying there in the darkness, aware of the other's warmth. Then Haley whispered into the night that her mother's medical bills, that support program, it was him, was it not? Luca was silent for a moment before saying that he did not want her to know, that he did not want her to think he was trying to buy her. Haley turned toward him in the darkness and said that she did not need him to be perfect. She only needed him to be honest from now on. Luca wrapped his arm around her, and for the first time in a month, they both slept peacefully in each other's arms. 3 months passed since the night Haley walked into Luca's room and lay beside him. 3 months in which they slowly rebuilt everything from the beginning, this time without lies, without secrets, only truth no matter how painful it was. Haley accepted Luca for who he was, not because she agreed with what he did, but because she understood that he was a product of the world he was born into, and beneath the shell of a ruthless boss was a man desperately trying to love and be loved. She continued working at the bakery because she refused to live off his money no matter how much he begged her to quit. And Luca eventually accepted that this was a part of who she was, that he loved, her independence and her pride that never bent. Her mother had recovered significantly and had been discharged home. Noah was still in medical school and had no idea his sister was dating a Mafia boss, and life slowly returned to normal, or at least normal by Moretti family standards. One evening, after Rosie and Bella had gone to bed and they were sitting together in the living room, Luca suddenly became strangely restless. He looked at Haley, then looked away, opened his mouth as if to say something and closed it again, until Haley finally asked what was wrong and told him he looked like he was about to explode. Luca took a deep breath and said he wanted to ask her something, but he was afraid she would think he was using money to keep her. Haley raised an eyebrow and asked what he wanted to ask. Luca looked at her with the most serious expression she had ever seen and said he wanted to marry her, that he wanted her to become his wife. But he did not know how to buy a ring, meaning he could buy any diamond she wanted. He could buy the entire jewelry store if she liked, but he knew she would hate that. She would think he was showing off or trying to buy her, and he did not want that. He wanted the ring to mean something. Haley stared at him wide-eyed and burst out laughing, telling him that Luca Moretti, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, the man who could make an entire city kneel, was nervous because he did not know what ring to buy for his girlfriend. Luca gave a dry laugh and said he had faced gangs, dealt with cold-blooded killers, survived battles he should not have survived, but he had never been as afraid of anything as he was of her saying no. Before Haley could answer, small footsteps echoed from the stairs, and Rosie appeared in unicorn pajamas, followed by Bella in an identical pair. Rosie stood in front of her father with the seriousness of a tiny adult and said, "Daddy, Bella and I have discussed this," emphasizing the word discussed, as if she had just learned it and was very proud to use it. Luca asked what they had discussed and why they were not asleep. Bella stepped out from behind her sister and said they knew Daddy wanted to marry Miss Haley, that they had heard him talking to Uncle Marco the week before, not eavesdropping, just walking by very slowly and stopping for a very long time. Luca looked at his daughters, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Rosie continued seriously, saying, "Daddy, you should use Mommy's ring, the one you keep in the drawer. We know you keep it there." Luca froze and asked in a choked voice if they were sure that it was their mother's ring. Bella nodded and said, "Mommy was not here anymore, but Miss Haley was here. She made Daddy laugh. She baked their birthday cake just like she promised. She hugged them when they were scared on the night of the gunfire. She kept her promises." Rosie took her sister's hand and added that Daddy always said Mommy believed family was the most important thing. Miss Haley was their family now, so Mommy would want her to have the beautiful ring. She was sure Mommy would want that. Haley sat there as tears began to stream down uncontrollably, crying not from sadness but because of these two children, these little angels who had lost their mother at 3 years old, now standing there allowing her to step into the place their mother had left behind, offering her the most precious thing they still had of her. Bella tilted her head when she saw Haley crying, and asked why she was crying and whether they had said something wrong. Haley shook her head and opened her arms. The girls ran into them, and she whispered into their hair that no, they had not said anything wrong. She was just crying because she was so happy. Bella looked up at her with wide eyes and said grown-ups were strange. If you were happy, you were supposed to laugh, not cry. The whole room burst into laughter, including Luca, as he wiped tears from his own eyes. And in that moment, Haley knew she had found her family. The following Friday, Luca texted Haley while she was working at the bakery, saying he wanted to take her somewhere that night, telling her to dress up a little and come to the address he sent at 7 o'clock. Haley asked where they were going, but he didn't answer, only sending a mysterious, smiling face that made her curious all day long. She went home earlier than usual to get ready, and when she stood in front of her wardrobe, now far fuller than the one in her old Brooklyn studio, she chose a simple black dress. Not because she didn't have prettier ones, but because this dress reminded her of who she truly was, the girl from Brooklyn who worked at a bakery with $35 in her account and somehow found the love of her life. When the taxi stopped at the address Luca had sent, Haley's heart skipped a beat. It was La Dolce Vita, the restaurant where they had gone on their first date, where her card had been declined, and she had cried in humiliation, where she thought her life had hit rock bottom, only to discover it was actually the beginning of everything. She stepped out of the taxi and saw Luca standing outside the restaurant, right beside the stone bench where they had sat and talked after that disastrous dinner, and she realized he was wearing the dark blue shirt, the exact one he had worn on their first date. Haley walked toward him with her heart pounding and asked Luca what he was doing and why they were there. Luca looked at her with eyes full of love and said he had thought long and hard about where to propose. He could have rented a private island, hired a plane to write her name across the sky, bought the entire Tiffany jewelry store, and let her choose anything she wanted. But he knew she would hate all of that. Haley nodded, feeling tears sting the corners of her eyes even though he hadn't said much yet. Luca continued, saying he wanted to bring her back to where everything began, where she sat crying from embarrassment, and he sat there thinking he had just met the realest, bravest, a most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He pointed to the stone bench and said this was where she apologized for not having enough money to pay for the meal. And in his mind he had thought that she didn't know who he was. She wasn't afraid of him. She looked at him like an ordinary man, and that was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to him in all 36 years of his life. Then Luca did something Haley hadn't expected, even though she had sensed it was coming. He knelt down on the sidewalk, right in front of the restaurant, right beside the stone bench, and took a small black velvet box from his pocket. Passers-by began to stop and stare. Tony rushed out from inside the restaurant with tears streaming down his face, and Haley stood there with her hands over her mouth as tears poured down uncontrollably. Luca opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring with a small diamond that sparkled under the streetlights. It wasn't the biggest or most expensive diamond he could have bought, but it was the most meaningful one. Gianna's ring. His voice trembled as he said it was Gianna's ring, and that Rosie and Bella wanted her to have it. They said their mother would want Haley to wear it because she had brought laughter back into their family, because she kept her promise to bake their birthday cake, because she held them through that terrifying night even when she was so angry at him she could barely stand it. Haley sobbed, unable to speak, standing there crying as Luca went on. He said Haley Reyes. He knew he wasn't perfect. He was a Mafia man. His hands were stained with blood. He had done things she could never fully forgive, and he wasn't asking for forgiveness because he didn't deserve it. But she was the only person who had ever truly seen him. Not the boss, not Luca Moretti, whom the entire city feared. Just Luca, a man who wanted to be loved, a father trying his best, a broken man kneeling on the sidewalk begging her for the chance to stay by her side for the rest of his life. His voice broke as he asked if she would marry him, if she would continue to be the one person who treated him like a normal human being, if she would become the mother of Rosie and Bella, if she would let him love her every day until he could no longer breathe. Haley knelt down in front of him, at eye level, and through tears she said yes, oh God, yes, 1,000 times yes, 1,000,000 times yes. She would marry him. She would be the mother of Rosie and Bella. She would let him love her every day. She didn't need him to be perfect. She just needed him to be him, the man who sat on this stone bench and told her it was okay when her card was declined, the man who quietly paid her mother's hospital bills without her knowing, the man who killed an entire gang to protect her, the man she loved knowing exactly who he was and what he had done. Luca took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been born to be there. The crowd on the sidewalk erupted into applause and cheers. Tony cried like a child and ran out to hug them both, shouting, "That boss. Finally someone who can put up with your impossible personality," and everyone burst out laughing. Luca stood up and pulled Haley up with him, then kissed her right there on the sidewalk, in front of La Dolce Vita, beside the stone bench where everything began. And Haley thought that the girl who cried in shame that night could never have imagined her life would lead to this moment, and she was grateful for every single step of the journey that had brought her here. 4 months after the sidewalk proposal, Haley and Luca were married in a ceremony she had dreamed of her entire life but never believed she would actually have. When Luca asked her where she wanted the wedding, how many guests she wanted to invite, and how much money she wanted to spend, Haley said only one thing, that she wanted a simple wedding in Brooklyn where she grew up, with the people she loved, nothing lavish or showy, because what mattered was not the party but the man she was choosing to build a life with. Luca agreed immediately, because he knew that was exactly what he loved about her. A simplicity and honesty that no amount of money could ever buy. They chose a small church in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from Haley's old apartment, a red brick church with stained glass windows and worn wooden pews that had witnessed countless weddings of working-class families in the neighborhood. Haley's wedding dress was not from any of the expensive designer boutiques Luca wanted to take her to, but a gown her mother had sewn by hand over 2 months after she recovered. A simple, white satin dress with lace details that Margaret stitched late into the night, one seam at a time, and when Haley put it on that morning, she knew no dress in the world could ever be more beautiful, because it was made from her mother's love. Luca wore a black suit, but pinned to his lapel was a small pink flower. Rosie and Bella had picked themselves from the garden that morning, and he wore it as if it were the most precious medal he had ever received. Rosie and Bella were the flower girls in pale pink dresses chosen by Rosa, their hair braided neatly with white ribbons, walking ahead of the bride, scattering rose petals down the aisle with faces so serious it looked like the most important mission of their lives. Noah walked Haley down the aisle because their father had passed long ago, and as they walked between the pews, Haley nearly laughed when she saw the guests, because it was the strangest mix she had ever seen. On one side were her co-workers from Sweet Rise, women in flower-stained aprons she had worked beside for 5 years, Maria sobbing even though the ceremony hadn't begun yet. Old Brooklyn neighbors her mother had invited, all dressed simply and looking around the church with curiosity. On the other side were men in expensive black suits, Luca's associates she had grown used to seeing over the months, Marco standing as best man with his arm still slightly stiff from an old injury, and Rosa seated in the front row beside Haley's mother. 2 women from completely different worlds who had become close friends through their shared love for this family. When the pastor asked Luca Moretti if he took Haley Reyes to be his wife, Luca looked at her with red-rimmed eyes and said, I do. I do to everything she is and everything she will be. I do to loving her in good days and bad days, in richness and in poverty, even though poverty probably won't happen, but I still do. Soft laughter rippled through the church and Haley shook her head because he always knew how to make her laugh even in the most solemn moments. When it was her turn and the pastor asked Haley Reyes if she took Luca Moretti to be her husband, Haley said, I do. I do to loving him, even in the parts of himself he thinks no one could ever love. Luca squeezed her hand tighter at that, and she saw a tear slide down his cheek. The pastor declared them husband and wife and said he could kiss the bride, and Luca kissed her as if it were both the first and last kiss of his life, while Rosie shouted, Ew, that's gross! And Bella yelled again, that's so good, making the entire church burst into laughter. The reception was held in a nearby park. The food was potluck from all the guests. Her bakery co-workers brought a 3-tier wedding cake. Haley herself had taught them how to make. Her mother cooked the family beef stew, and Rosa brought Italian dishes she had been cooking for the Moretti family for decades. In the middle of the celebration, as Haley was talking with Maria, Bella ran over, tugging at her hand, and asked softly, Auntie Haley, now you're really a mom, right? Can I call you Mom? Haley knelt to her level, tears spilling as she said, You can call me anything you want. I'll always be your mom. Rosie ran over to her sister and said, Then can I call you Mama Haley? Because I don't want to forget Mama Gianna. Mama Gianna is still our first mom, and Mama Haley is our second mom. That way we have 2 moms. Haley pulled both girls into her arms and whispered that Mama Haley sounded perfect. She loved them, and they would never forget Mama Gianna, because she would help them remember her every day. Luca stood a few steps away, watching the 3 most important women in his life holding one another. And he thought that if Gianna was watching from above, she would be smiling, because he had found someone worthy of continuing to love their daughters. 1 year has passed since the day they exchanged vows in the small church in Brooklyn. 1 year in which Haley still wakes up every morning and wonders if she is dreaming, because her life has changed completely in ways she never could have imagined. But one thing has not changed. She still works at Sweet Rise Bakery, except now she is the manager instead of the woman behind the counter. Luca has suggested many times that she quit or open her own bakery so she could be her own boss. But Haley refused because she loves this job. She loves the smell of flour in the early morning. She loves the familiar customers who come in every day for croissants. She loves the feeling of earning her own money through her own work, even though she knows that amount means nothing compared to her husband's wealth. Luca understands that and no longer pushes her. Instead, he quietly invests in the bakery so it can grow and so Haley can hire more staff and work less, something she does not discover until Maria accidentally lets it slip and Haley scolds him, before finally forgiving him because she knows he did it out of love. Luca himself has changed greatly over the past year. He has gradually stepped back from the violent activities of the Moretti family, handing most of the underground operations over to Marco and focusing on more legitimate businesses. He is still the boss, still the head of the family no one dares to challenge, But he is no longer the man who gives kill orders or stands in the middle of wars. Because now he has too much to lose. Haley, Rosie and Bella. A family he would do anything to protect, even changing himself. Rosie and Bella are now 7 years old, in 2nd grade, and every day they have new stories to tell Mama Haley. They are used to having 2 mothers. Mama Gianna in the photographs on the walls and in the stories their father tells, and Mama Haley who is here every day making breakfast, reading bedtime stories, and kissing them goodbye when they leave for school. Haley's mother has fully recovered and now lives in an apartment near the mansion so she can visit her grandchildren easily, no longer worrying about hospital bills or rent, even though she insists on cooking for herself and refuses to let her son-in-law hire help. Noah has graduated and is now a resident at Mount Sinai Hospital. He still does not know the full truth about his brother-in-law's work, but he knows enough not to ask questions, and he only cares that his sister is happy. One autumn evening, after putting Rosie and Bella to bed, Haley and Luca stand in the kitchen baking together. This is a tradition they started after getting married. Every Saturday night they bake something. Sometimes cookies, sometimes cupcakes, sometimes more complicated recipes Haley wants to experiment with. Luca is still clumsy in the kitchen despite a year of lessons from his wife. And tonight he has flour all over his face again, making Haley laugh uncontrollably. She wipes his face with a towel and says she cannot believe the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast cannot mix a bowl of batter without turning himself into a snowman. Luca shrugs and says he has many other talents. Mixing batter is not one of them. They finish the batch and sit down on the living room sofa with 2 glasses of wine, the house quiet in the late night, only the ticking clock and the sound of each other's breathing. Haley rests her head on Luca's shoulder and says, "You know, sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." Luca kisses the top of her head and asks what she means. Haley looks around the spacious living room with its expensive paintings and crystal chandelier and says the poor girl from Brooklyn working at a bakery with $35 in her account never thought she would have a family like this. A husband who loves her unconditionally, 2 wonderful daughters, a home she once thought only existed in movies. Luca turns her to look into her eyes and says that a cold, ruthless mafia boss also never thought he would be this happy, that someone would look at him as a normal man worthy of love, that he would find someone who is not afraid of him, does not need his money, only needs him to be himself. They sit in silence for a long time, enjoying the peace they both had to suffer so much to earn. Then Haley laughs and says, "We are the strangest couple in the world." Luca laughs with her and says the strangest and the happiest. People often ask Haley how a poor girl like her ended up marrying one of the most powerful men in America. They assume it must be about money, about protection, about the luxurious life he could give her. They do not understand. Luca did not love her because she needed his money. He loved her for the exact opposite reason, because she was the only person who did not need anything from him except who he truly was. She cried on their first date when her card was declined, believing it was the most humiliating moment of her life, the moment she wanted to disappear from the face of the earth. It turned out to be the moment that changed her entire life, because in that moment, she showed Luca her real self. No pretending, no hiding, just a poor girl who was embarrassed but not small, crying but not begging, and that was exactly what he needed. Not someone who feared him, not someone who wanted his money, just someone who truly saw him, the man beneath all the layers of power and ruthlessness. Haley stands by the living room window, looking out at the garden, where Luca is playing tag with Rosie and Bella. The laughter of the 3 of them fills the autumn afternoon, Luca deliberately running slowly so the girls can catch him, then falling onto the grass and letting them climb all over him while they laugh uncontrollably. That is the man the entire city fears, lying on the lawn letting his little daughters use him as a horse. Luca looks up and sees her standing by the window. He smiles and waves, and that smile still makes her heart race, even after more than a year together. Haley waves back and whispers to herself that this is the best declined card of my life. Sometimes the most embarrassing moments lead to the most beautiful things. Sometimes the most powerful man only wants to be loved unconditionally. And sometimes the poorest girl has exactly what he needs. Not money, not beauty, just honesty. If this story reminds you that honesty is more valuable than any wealth, that the right person will not run away when they see you at your worst, that you do not need to be perfect to be loved, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can bring you more touching stories every day. We would truly love to know how you feel about this story, whether it touched your heart, whether it made you think about your own life, about the times you felt ashamed of your circumstances, about the people who stayed by your side knowing all your flaws. Leave a comment below and share what is in your heart, because every story deserves to be told. Thank you for being here with us. We wish you and your family good health, happiness, and peace every single day. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again in the next video.